We're here at Morgan-Monroe State Forest, and some of this area that you see today looked much different back in the early 1930s when the state acquired the land. If you look at the photos from back then, a lot of the area was bare trees, there was a lot of erosion, and the area just was not very productive. Since that time, the Division of Forestry has managed this property, and they came in the beginning and they did a lot of tree planting, they did some timber stand improvement work on the area, and now we have the forest that we have out here today, such as the area over at the backcountry area that we saw earlier. The backcountry area was established in 1981, and the main purpose for the backcountry area was to provide recreation. Timber management was part of that plan, and that's something that still goes on there today. We do it in a modified manner in where we only use single tree selections. We're not using group selections or other silvicultural methods.
Silviculture is the art of treating stands of trees for varying practices, varying goals. On the majority of the forest, and when we have a harvest, is the track is looked at. We try to schedule an improvement cutting, which is usually the selective marking of small, individual trees. We focus on trying to increase the health and vigor and the quality and the structure of the forest stand and improve it over time. And a lot of these sales that we have had in the past have had 2 or 3 cutting cycles on them, so we're starting to see a lot of a gain in quality and growth, especially in the last 10 years. Their growth has really increased on the property.
Well, there's a lot of reasons why we mark trees, but some of the reasons might be the tree is declining in vigor. The tree may have poor form, such as this one. It's got a real crook to it. And also a major thing that we're looking for is when we harvest a tree, we want to release something else that's adjacent that has quality or has a wildlife value. And if you look right below us here, there's 2 or 3 hickories that actually are of more value as far as wildlife and wood products than a tulip poplar would be.
When you're going to fall a tree, you're going to look at the lean of the tree. Which way is it leaning? This tree's leaning downhill and it's wanting to go into that pignut hickory and the shagbark hickory. So he's going to have to try to avoid it by notching it in a direction that's most safe for him and the forest, the residual stand.
We're standing at the log landing at this timber sale site. This is the area after they cut the trees. They skid them up to this area here. They will cut them to size and load them on trucks from here, and they'll go to the mill from here. People use different equipment, but this is pretty standard here with a knuckle boom loader and a cut-off saw. So it's all done pretty much by machine, and the safety is much better when doing it by the machine. Today they're not operating. It's pretty wet out here today. We don't allow operations on really wet days. We want to protect the site as much as we can. Once it dries out, they'll be back up here, and semi-trucks will actually come to this site and they'll load them up and haul them out. A lot of these areas that we're working on now, in the past, this area was private land. Most of the area was cleared, it was farmed, it was pastured, and the trees that were there at the time were damaged quite a bit. A lot of fires went through these areas, so a lot of the bottom part of the tree is cut off and left here on the site. A lot of our areas where we have these sites, we'll let firewood cutters come in and actually cut that up and take it home to heat their homes. Okay, we're here at Morgan-Monroe on another log landing site. This site here was done about 4 years ago. Again, this is where they skidded the logs into, loaded them onto the truck, and then hauled them to the mill. This area is very similar to that site that was being actively logged, in that this was a fairly wet yard at the time, and you can see that it's recovered very well since the logging and we're starting to get trees growing up in here and some brush, and all that is natural. We do not plant them in here.
Hey, we're on another site right now that was selectively harvested approximately 8 to 10 years ago. But the stand is pretty well recovered. The skid trails and the skidding of the track, we have a lot of leaf cover that usually comes in the site within a year or two after the harvest is done, and it pretty well starts the decomposition and rebuilding up of the soil. So we're looking at a top here that was harvested about 8 to 10 years ago. This one was evidently not removed by the firewood cutting operation, but as you can tell, only the largest bowl of the top is left. Once the tree is cut, the fine limbs degrade rapidly into the soil, and basically the only evidence you'll have of a top would be the biggest part of it. These tops are real valuable. They provide wildlife habitat. We've got squirrel activity on top of this where they've been feeding and eating nuts. If you look underneath this log, you would find a lot of earthworms and herptiles, what we call lizards, a lot of skinks, newts and salamanders that frequent this, because what happens in the dry part of the year, these logs will actually retain moisture that's not out in the regular forest floor, and the wildlife will flourish underneath those tops even during dry periods. So they provide a very valuable resource for those amphibians that need a lot of moisture. Sometimes there is a skid trail that goes to just one tree, and there's very little soil disturbance. But when you have like several trees that are dragged out on one skid trail, it becomes more disturbed, and it's what we call more of a major skid trail. So then we apply different management practices such as water bars. What the operator does is he puts a bar across the trail so that when water comes down the trail, it hits this water bar and it goes off onto the forest floor, which slows the water down and puts it into infiltrating through the roots and the leaves that's left over in undisturbed areas, and it keeps the water from going down trails. Dan and I are walking along what we talked earlier about as being a major skid trail, with one that we would have closed out. And as we were walking along this trail, you can notice that there's some debris in the trail, and the vegetation has recovered substantially, and it's returning back to a natural forest floor condition. Now, to the casual observer, this area, if you weren't looking very carefully, you would probably walk down that trail and you'd not realize that was a major logging access road. Following this timber sale, we have what's called a timber stand improvement project that usually is to release trees that, say we mark a sale and half the trees didn't get harvested because of for whatever reason, the logger did not want to take that tree. We'll go back and do some deadening of those stems, which increases, the ability of those trees that were marked or that were retained to grow, and also it provides a good source of wildlife habitat for cavity nesting birds and bats.
Timber management is only a small part of the management of the state forest system. The state forests as a whole are managed under a multiple use, multiple benefit philosophy, where not only do we manage timber, we perform forest restoration activities, including timber stand improvement projects, tree plantings, and other forest restoration activities. In addition, there's a fair amount of camping across the state forest system with primitive and developed campgrounds. There's extensive hiking trails across the state forests and horse trails, hundreds of miles across the entire system. One of the other things going on here at Morgan-Monroe State Forest is the hardwood ecosystem experiment, which is a long-term experimental and research project on the state forest here to help model and predict and practice different forest management on the property, to better inform our foresters and resource managers to understand the full implications of management on the properties. Through this long-term experiment, we will gain better understanding and even improve operations as we go forward.